He is a multi-billionaire, but he decided to disguise himself to be a common, poor bricklayer just to find true love. He doesn't want any woman who will love him for his wealth or his popularity. Will she find true love? Let's find out. Meanwhile, if you're just tuning into this channel, please subscribe to our channel and give this story a thumbs up. Also tell us where you're watching from. In the bustling heart of Lagos, where towering cranes punctured the skyline and the air trembled with the rhythm of machines, there stood a half-finished construction site, just one among many in the restless city. Beneath the scaffolding, in a sea of cement, sweat, and sand, worked a man no one paid much attention to. His name was Agu Naji, or so they thought. To his fellow bricklayers, he was just another laborer trying to earn a day's meal under the unforgiving sun. But Agu was no ordinary man. He was a billionaire in hiding. Behind the dust-caked face and worn-out clothes was the mastermind of one of Nigeria's largest construction empires, Agu Tech Holdings. He owned estates in Banana Island, had dined with presidents, and made deals in Dubai and Singapore. Yet here he was, bent over cement blocks, lifting bricks with trembling arms, and silently observing a world that would have bowed before him had they known his name. Why? Because Agu was tired. He was tired of women who only loved the sound of his bank account, tired of friends who smiled only when he gave, tired of yes-men, pretenders, and gold diggers. His last relationship had ended in disgrace. He had overheard his fiancée bragging to her friends about how she would endure his looks just to secure the lifestyle. That night, Agu stood by his penthouse window overlooking the Victoria Island skyline and made a bold decision. He would disappear. He shaved his beard, changed his hairstyle, donated his luxury wardrobe, and instructed his assistant to keep his whereabouts hidden. Then, with only a backpack and a few naira, he walked into a world that had once served him, now determined to see it from the bottom up. He found work as a laborer at a random building site in Ikeja. It was hard, brutal work. The first week, his hands bled, his back ached. He ate cold bread and drank sachet water. No one recognized him. To them, he was just that quiet new guy, and that suited him perfectly. Yet, as the days passed, he saw what he had come to see. Women passed by the site often, some delivering items, others waiting for workers who had promised to send money. None spared Agu a second glance. One particularly striking lady in high heels laughed as her friend pointed at Agu mixing cement. "Even if I'm dying of hunger, I'll never marry a man like that," she said loud enough for him to hear. Another woman selling snacks refused to hand Agu a meat pie when he couldn't pay in full. "No credit for men who can't afford real jobs," she sneered. The rejection was sharp, but it didn't surprise him. What struck Agu most was how easily dignity was stripped from a man based on his appearance. Here he was, the owner of the entire site, being looked down upon by the very people whose bills he unknowingly paid. But Agu didn't flinch. He worked harder. He woke up at dawn, swept the dusty grounds, carried more bags than he was assigned, and earned quiet respect from a few older workers who admired his diligence. Still, most people avoided him. Mothers warned their daughters to stay away from men who smell of sweat and failure. No one knew his name. No one cared. Yet every night, after scrubbing off the grime from his skin with cold water from a cracked pipe, Agu would stare at the night sky and remember his mother's words. "If you want to find a woman who sees your heart, not your house, you must first cover your crown." And so he remained there, working, watching, waiting. One evening, as he sat alone near a stack of blocks, watching the sun dip behind Lagos rooftops, he wrote in a small journal he had hidden in his backpack. Day 27. I have seen the eyes of women who see nothing but my dirt. I have heard the laughter of men who think a man is only as worthy as his shoes. But somewhere in this dust, I believe there is still one soul who sees beyond it. I must find her. And then, as if fate had heard his silent prayer, the next morning arrived with something different. A gentle voice, a familiar clatter of dishes, and the scent of freshly cooked jollof rice. That was the morning Veronica walked into his life, balancing coolers of food on her head, unaware that her path was about to cross with a man whose secret would change her life forever. The morning after Agu's journal entry dawned with a dull gray sky and the promise of more sweat. The building site was already alive by 6 o'clock a.m. Metal clanking, foreman barking, and the air thick with the smell of wet cement and diesel. Agu moved slowly, exhausted from days of labor and sleepless nights. He hadn't eaten since the previous morning, his pocket was empty, and the stale bread he had hidden under his bag had been eaten by rats. He was kneeling by a pile of bricks when he heard it. A soft, rhythmic jingle, metal spoons clinking gently in a plastic bowl. He turned his head. Walking through the gate was a young woman balancing 2 stainless steel coolers on her head, wrapped in an old scarf. Her wrapper swayed with each step, and though her slippers were worn, she walked with grace. She couldn't have been more than 22. She looked tired but determined. "Hot rice, beans and dodo," she called out with surprising cheer. Her voice cut through the noise and settled like warmth in Agu's chest. For reasons he couldn't explain, he watched her longer than he should have. Most of the workers rushed forward to buy food, but Agu remained at a distance. She moved efficiently, scooping rice, measuring beans, and dashing out meat with a soft smile and a soft thank you. Her movements were smooth, practiced. Her hands moved quickly, but there was a gentle kindness in her face, different from anything Agu had seen since arriving. Eventually, the crowd thinned. She stood, fanning herself with the lid of a cooler, when Agu approached, slowly, cautiously. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse. She looked up. Her eyes were large, dark, and steady. She studied his face for a moment, then smiled. "Morning, sir. You want rice?" Agu hesitated and patted his pockets, embarrassed. I was just coming to ask for water." Without blinking, she reached into her carrier bag, pulled out a sachet of cold water, and handed it to him. "No problem. You look tired. It's hot today," she said. He took it. "Thank you." Just then, a crumpled N500 note fell from his pocket and landed in a muddy puddle. He bent to pick it up, but she was quicker. Veronica crouched down, picked it up gently, and rinsed it with water from her hand-washing bottle. Then she dried it with the edge of her wrapper before handing it back. Agu stared at her, stunned. Most women would have grimaced. Some might have mocked, but she handled the dirty money as if it were gold, without judgment, without hesitation. "What's your name?" he asked. "Veronica." "Veronica," he repeated, almost to himself. "I'm Agu." She nodded. "Nice to meet you, Agu. You look like someone who works too hard and eats too little." He laughed, a small, genuine laugh he hadn't felt in weeks. "I suppose that's true," he replied. That afternoon, Agu returned to her food stand and ordered a small plate of beans and plantain. He didn't have enough money, but she gave it to him anyway. "Pay when you can," she said simply. He tried to protest, but she waved it off. Over the next few days, it became a routine. Agu would look for her every morning, and Veronica would always greet him with that same quiet smile. Sometimes she gave him extra meat. Other times, he would help her carry the coolers to the bus stop after lunch. The other workers noticed and began whispering, laughing. "Agu don, fine wife," one joked. But Agu didn't care. He was drawn to her simplicity. She didn't try to impress. She didn't speak loudly or dress to attract. Yet she had a dignity about her, a strength he couldn't explain. One evening as they sat beside the cement mixer, sharing a sachet of groundnuts, Agu asked, "Why are you always so kind to me?" She looked up at the sky for a moment, then said softly, "Because I've known what it feels like to have nothing and still need kindness. People look down on you fast in this world. I just don't want to be one of them." Agu was silent. Something inside him shifted. In a world where people chase money and status, here was a girl who still believed in dignity, empathy, and honor. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know the land she stood on belonged to him. Yet she treated him with more respect than all the women who had tried to sit in his Benz and drink champagne at his villa. And so, slowly, a seed was planted. Not of desire, not of infatuation, but of something deeper, hope. Because for the first time since he began his disguise, Agu thought, maybe, just maybe, she is the one I've been waiting for. The rainy season crept into Lagos like an unwelcome guest. Gray clouds gathered daily, casting long shadows across the city's skeleton buildings. The once dry and dusty construction site became a muddy maze. Boots sank into the earth, cement dried slower, and tempers rose faster. But amid the chaos, one thing remained constant: Veronica and Agu's growing bond. Every morning, despite the rain, Veronica still came. She now tied a nylon sheet over her coolers and wrapped her scarf tighter against the wind. Her clothes were often soaked by midday, but she never stopped smiling, especially when she saw Agu. They didn't speak much in front of others. They had developed a quiet understanding, a connection in the way their eyes met across the scaffolding. When Agu was too tired to walk over, Veronica brought the food to him. Sometimes he paid, sometimes he didn't, but she never once asked for money. Other workers started to notice. Some teased, some mocked. Veronica must be doing charity work now. See love in the rain. Sister, better shine your eyes. This one no get future. Agu heard it all. So did Veronica. But she never responded. She kept serving food, kept laughing, kept wiping her cooler lids clean, as if the words around her didn't exist. But not everyone stayed silent. One afternoon, a woman appeared at the site, dressed in a tight blouse and loud slippers, her expression as sharp as a kitchen knife. It was Madame Ijoma, Veronica's aunt. She marched across the mud-streaked site, her face twisted in anger. When she spotted Veronica sitting on a slab of concrete beside Agu, laughing over a shared sachet of chin-chin, she exploded. "Veronica," she shouted, "what are you doing sitting with this dirty man?" Agu slowly stood, confused, but Veronica's face had already paled. "Auntie, please," she said softly. "He's not what you think." "I said stand up," Madame Ijoma roared, grabbing her niece by the arm. "So this is why you're always late? Sitting with a bricklayer? Is this what you've become?" Veronica tried to explain, but her aunt was relentless. "You think a man who can't afford 3 meals is a husband? You think love will feed you? Foolish girl, if your mother were alive." Veronica flinched. Agu watched quietly, fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to speak, to defend her, to tell this woman she was insulting a man who could buy 10 of her shops and still have change. But he stayed silent. He had chosen this test. He had chosen this path. Before he could step forward, Madame Ijoma shoved Veronica's food cooler to the ground. Plates shattered. Rice and stew spilled like fallen pride. Everyone froze. "I don't want to see you near this man again," she spat. "You've disgraced this family enough." Then she turned and stormed off. Veronica stood motionless. Her lips trembled, but no tears came. Slowly, she bent down and began picking up the broken plates. Agu knelt beside her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She shook her head. "Don't be. You didn't do anything wrong." That night, Agu waited near the back of the site where a small wooden structure stood. He didn't see her again that day. But when the sun disappeared and the clouds opened, the rain fell in sheets. Still, she didn't come. He worried. Maybe she had been forced to leave. Maybe Madame Ijoma had locked her inside. Maybe he had pushed her too far just by existing in her life. Then, just before midnight, a soft knock echoed from the edge of the site. She stood there, shivering in the rain, carrying nothing but a nylon bag of clothes and a plastic spoon. "My aunt said I'm no longer welcome in her house," she said quietly. "She said if I choose to associate with a man like you, I should find somewhere else to sleep." Agu stared at her, heart pounding. There's a dry corner in the building," he said. "It's not much, but it's safe. You can rest there." She nodded, and just like that, Veronica entered his world. Not the world of secrets and wealth, but the real one. The raw one. The one with no roof, no furniture, no comfort. Just 2 people trying to survive. He offered her his only jacket again. She lay on a pile of folded cement bags, while he sat against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. "I'm sorry you're going through this because of me," he said softly. She looked at him from the darkness. "I'd rather be cold beside someone who respects me," she replied, "than warm in a house where I'm treated like a fool." Agu turned his face away, but not fast enough. A tear had already slipped down his cheek. The unfinished building became their refuge. Veronica didn't complain. She swept the corner, arranged their shoes neatly by the wall, and folded her clothes into a nylon bag that became her pillow. They had no fan, no stove, no electricity, only the wind and the stars and the cold cement beneath their bodies. But still, every night, Veronica smiled. Every morning they woke before the sun rose. Veronica would freshen up with water from a broken pipe behind the building and tie her scarf with quiet dignity. Agu would pack his tools and head downstairs to mix cement and haul bricks, while Veronica went off to hustle what little she could selling bread and sachet water to nearby vendors, no longer with her food coolers, which her aunt had taken away in anger. There were days they didn't eat, days when they shared a sachet of ghari soaked in water, days when all they had was a single roasted plantain. But Agu noticed something. Veronica never complained. Instead, she hummed while sweeping the floor with the palm broom. She joked about the mosquitoes being over-friendly guests. She made the cold building feel like home with nothing but her voice and her presence. And every night after Agu returned from work with sore shoulders and blistered palms, she would welcome him like a king returning from war. "You're back," she would say softly, offering him the first bite of whatever meager meal they managed to find. "You look tired, but still strong." Her words lifted more than his spirits. They lifted the weight he carried, the guilt, the secrets, the fear that maybe this disguise had gone too far. One night, the rain came with thunder. The wind howled through the open windows, slamming wooden planks against the wall. Agu woke up startled to find Veronica shivering beside him, her arms wrapped around herself. Without hesitation, he pulled her close. She didn't resist. She rested her head against his chest, and he held her, feeling her heart beat against his. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Finally, she whispered, "Do you miss home?" Agu paused. He could have said, "I own a mansion in Ikoyi." He could have said, "I have 7 cars, 3 houses abroad, and a private chef." But he didn't. He simply said, "Yes." Veronica nodded. "Me too." They lay there in silence, listening to the rain beat down like war drums on the zinc roof. In that moment, Agu realized something powerful. Veronica wasn't in love with his money because she didn't know it existed. She had fallen in love with the man beneath the surface, with his quiet strength, with his kindness, with the part of him even he had forgotten existed. The next morning, Agu watched her as she fetched water from the broken tap. Her wrapper was damp, her slippers worn thin. She was the very picture of hardship, but her eyes shone with something rare, contentment, and that, to him, was more beautiful than diamonds. Later that day, Agu's coworker, Sunday, teased him at lunch. "You and that hawker girl, love in the gutter? Are you two planning to marry under the scaffolding?" Agu smiled politely, but said nothing. That evening, as he and Veronica sat side by side, sharing a roasted corn cob, he turned to her. "I've never known peace like this before," he said. Veronica laughed gently. "We're sleeping on cement, Agu." "Yes," he replied, "but my heart has never been softer." She grew quiet. Then she asked, "If I told you I had nothing to offer, no future, no money, would you still sit here beside me?" He didn't hesitate. "I'd sit here for the rest of my life." She turned to face him fully. "What if we never leave this building? What if this is all we ever have?" Agu looked around at the broken walls, the hanging wires, the exposed rebar. Then he looked at her. "If I have you beside me, I won't notice." In that moment, something passed between them. Something deeper than words. A promise. A bond. Not one sealed by wealth or luxury, but by shared struggle, by trust, by quiet love built in silence and cement. That night he lay awake staring at the ceiling beams. He knew the end of the test was near. He knew that soon he would have to reveal the truth. But a question haunted him. Will she forgive me for not telling her sooner? Weeks passed. The rainy season softened, but Agu's feelings grew stronger, richer than the soil beneath his tired boots. Every day he worked harder. Every night he returned to Veronica with scraped palms and aching muscles, yet her presence made everything bearable. Her laughter, her resilience, her ability to find light in the darkest corners. It humbled him. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden behind the skeletal building, Agu sat with Veronica, watching her stitch a torn hem on her wrapper. She was focused, lips slightly parted, hands working gently but efficiently. "You sew well," he said. She smiled without looking up. "My mother taught me, before she passed." Agu nodded, hesitating. You speak about her often. She was my best friend, Veronica said softly. She taught me how to cook, how to sell, how to pray when I'm in pain, and how to smile even when life is unfair. Agu swallowed hard. He wanted to take her away from all of this, to lift her out of the dust and place her in the palace she deserved. But he wasn't ready, not yet. The truth would come, but only after one last step. The next day, Agu went to the market alone. He sold an old wristwatch he had been holding on to. It wasn't real gold, just a symbol, a reminder of the world he had left behind, but it fetched enough for a small gift. That night, under a full moon and beside a flickering lantern, Agu reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't made of gold or diamonds. It was a copper wire twisted carefully around a small, smooth stone he had found while working. It was crude, but it sparkled in the light like a hidden treasure. Veronica blinked, confused. "What's this?" she asked gently. Agu's voice trembled. "It's not much, but it's the only thing I've ever given someone with my whole heart." Veronica stared at him. "I have no house, no savings, and nothing to offer except my love," Agu continued. "But if you'll accept this, I'll spend the rest of my life building something better. With you." Tears welled up in Veronica's eyes. She held the ring delicately, as if afraid it would break. "You're the only man who ever respected me enough to ask," she whispered. Then slowly she slid the wire ring onto her finger. "Yes," she said, 100 times, yes." They sat in silence for a long time, fingers intertwined, the wind gently swaying the tall grasses around the building. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. The city buzzed with its usual noise, but their corner of the world was still sacred. The next morning, word spread among the workers. "You've proposed to her?" one asked, incredulous. "With what money?" Another laughed. "Love won't pay rent, my brother." Some shook their heads, others jeered, but Agu remained calm. He had nothing to prove to them. Veronica, however, faced it all with grace. "Let them laugh," she whispered to Agu later. "The world laughed at my mother too, until the day she passed and the whole street cried." In her, Agu saw the kind of strength wealth could never buy. And in him, Veronica saw the kind of man no amount of status could create. Together, they were building something invisible to the world, but unshakable at its core, love. The wedding day arrived like a dream wrapped in morning mist. There was no cathedral, no choir, no white carpet, just an open space near the building site, a faded canopy borrowed from a local event planner, and a few plastic chairs arranged in rows. Agu wore an old gray suit donated by one of the masons. Veronica wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself using leftover fabric and threads she bought from the market. Her veil was made from a sheer curtain she found in a nearby trash heap and washed diligently for days. It had holes in the corners, but to Agu she looked like royalty. None of Veronica's relatives attended. Madame Ijoma had forbidden anyone from shaming the family further by showing up. The workers came, though, not because they believed in the marriage, but because they were curious. "Let's see this love that lives on hunger," someone muttered under their breath. Agu's heart pounded, not with nerves but with anticipation. He was about to reveal everything. As the officiant, a retired pastor from the nearby street, began to speak, Agu's mind drifted to all the moments that had led him here. The muddy puddles, the torn wrapper, the sachet water she gave him without hesitation, the nights they slept on bare cement, the morning prayers Veronica whispered softly when she thought he was asleep. Now it was time. Just before the exchange of vows, Agu raised his hand gently. "Please, just a moment." He turned to the small crowd of workers, onlookers, and curious neighbors. Then he turned to Veronica, who stood there wide-eyed, unsure of what was happening. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to the officiant, who read its contents aloud. "Certificate of Ownership, Agu Naji, CEO of Agutech Holdings, sole owner of Lagos Skyline Projects, and all associated real estate assets." There was a heavy pause. Someone dropped their water bottle. Murmurs erupted. Agu stepped forward and took the microphone. "My name is Agu Naji," he said. "I own this building site. I own the company that employs most of the men here. I came here dressed in cement, covered in sweat, not to deceive, but to see if love could survive without wealth. He turned to Veronica. And you, Veronica, fed me when I had nothing to offer. You gave without asking. You defended me when everyone else mocked me. You saw me when I was invisible. Veronica stood frozen. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The workers, many of whom had once laughed at Agu, now stood in stunned silence. Agu stepped closer. This dress is not humble, he said to her gently. It's powerful, because the woman wearing it loved a man without knowing his name. He knelt. And now that you know it, Veronica, will you still be my wife? Through the tears, she nodded, and then her voice came, soft, trembling, and sure. Yes, with all my heart. The air shifted that day. News spread like wildfire. The bricklayer is a billionaire. People who once laughed now whispered in awe. Phones buzzed with blurry photos from the simple wedding. Headlines swirled across local blogs. Mystery groom at Ikeja construction site turns out to be Tycoon Agu Naji. But the truest moment of awe came after the ceremony. Agu held Veronica's hand as they stepped into a gleaming black SUV that had arrived just minutes after the vows were exchanged. Veronica, still stunned, sat in silence as the car glided past familiar streets and turned toward parts of Lagos she had only seen on TV. They stopped in front of a magnificent glass mansion in Ikoyi. The gates opened slowly. "Welcome home," Agu said. Tears rolled silently down Veronica's cheeks. This is your house?" He nodded. "It's ours now." Inside, maids and security guards stood respectfully. Veronica's mouth opened in shock. The living room alone was larger than her aunt's entire compound. Later that evening, Agu drove her back, not to the mansion, but to the same dusty building site. The workers had gathered. Some were still in disbelief. The same men who had once mocked him stood stiffly, awkwardly, ashamed. Agu stepped out and addressed them. "This site was built with your hands. Today I honor that." He turned to the foreman. "Double every worker's salary, starting now," and he looked at Veronica with pride. "A new foundation will be laid here next month. It will be a community center and scholarship foundation in Veronica's name, for the daughters of every laborer who dreams of more." There was silence, then slowly, applause, then tears. Madame Ijoma arrived moments later, breathless and stunned. Her eyes searched Veronica's, pleading. Veronica walked over, calm and steady. "I don't hold bitterness, Auntie, but I will never forget how quickly you threw me away." Madame Ijoma collapsed to her knees. "Forgive me." Veronica lifted her gently. "Forgiveness is a gift," she said softly, "but respect must be earned." That night, as Agu and Veronica stood hand in hand under the stars, he whispered, "Thank you for loving me when I had nothing." She smiled. "I didn't fall in love with your money, Agu. I fell in love with your soul." And beneath the night sky, with no disguise left to wear, Agu finally felt free,